imagine packing your bags for an 11-day road trip. You have the map charted out, you've got the vehicle, and you know the exact destination.
Right. The weather is clear. You're ready to go.
Exactly. You start the engine, but then imagine getting so, entirely paralyzed by anxiety, by all this internal fighting, and maybe a few terrifying rumors along the way, that it takes you 40 years to finally pull your car into the driveway.
Wow. 40 years to make an 11-day drive.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds completely insane.
It sounds like a surrealist nightmare, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it is the literal geographical reality that grounds the historical narrative we're looking at today.
Yeah, and that's the distance between Mount Horeb, which is also known as Mount Sinai, right?
Exactly. Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea.
Right. The southern entry point into the Promised Land. Yeah. And the sources we are analyzing today, which is this really fascinating stack of theological notes and these detailed historical outlines covering the book of Deuteronomy.
They're great sources.
Yeah.
Very thorough.
They really are. And they place immense weight on this specific disparity, between the physical distance and the massive psychological delay.
Because it wasn't a geographical problem, it's entirely a psychological one.
Exactly. And that delay forms the core of our deep dive today. We're exploring the profound and, frankly, often uncomfortable significance of Israel's 40-year wilderness wanderings.
It's a heavy topic.
It is. We are going to journey from the catastrophic, heartbreaking failures of an older generation right up to the hopeful yet incredibly tense threshold of the future for a new generation.
Setting the stage for the Canaanite conquest.
Yep. We'll explore how ancient territorial victories over these seemingly impossible strongholds and incredibly strict divine boundaries and the poignant handover of leadership offer us right now, today, highly relevant lessons on personal accountability.
And the nature of fear.
Yes, fear and moral decision-making.
Well, to really grasp the gravity of this, we need to understand the exact staging of the text. So it is the 40th year, specifically the 11th month since the Exodus from Egypt.
Wow, so right at the very end.
Right at the end. Moses, the architect of this entire migration, is 120 years old.
That's just wild to think about.
It is. And the Israelites are camped on the plains of Moab. They're standing on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and they're looking directly across the water at the walled fortress of Jericho.
So close they can literally see it.
Exactly. Behind them stretches 4 decades of sun-scorched, seemingly endless desert. And ahead of them is the culmination of a centuries-old promise.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why they are standing on those plains of Moab waiting to cross, we have to understand why they didn't cross 4 decades earlier at Kadesh Barnea.
Which was the original plan.
Right. And our sources provide a quote that I think perfectly summarizes the sociological crisis of this nation. It says, "It took only 3 days to get Israel out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel."
I love that quote. It captures the central tension of the entire wandering period so well.
It really does. I mean, what does getting Egypt out of Israel actually look like on the ground?
Well, it meant extracting this deeply ingrained mindset of slavery. It meant purging a cultural DNA that was conditioned to rely on an oppressive master for sustenance.
Right, because when you're a slave, your choices are made for you.
Exactly. It's a mindset that is inherently prone to panic when faced with autonomous responsibility. So Kadesh Barnea was the ultimate stress test of whether that slave mentality had actually been broken.
And spoiler alert, they failed that stress test spectacularly.
They really did.
So Moses, with divine permission, sends 12 spies into the land of Canaan from Kadesh Barnea. And they are tasked with essentially doing military reconnaissance, right?
Right. They need to assess the topography, the agricultural viability, the fortifications of the cities.
And the strength of the people living there. And when they return after 40 days, they bring back physical proof of the land's immense abundance.
The famous grapes.
Yes. They carry back a cluster of grapes from the valley of Eshkol that is so massive it literally has to be carried on a pole between 2 men.
Which sounds like a myth, but the land was incredibly fertile.
And they all universally report that the land flows with milk and honey. It's exactly what was promised.
But the data gathering immediately fractures into competing narratives.
This is where it goes off the rails.
Completely. 10 of those 12 spies present a report that effectively initiates a nationwide psychological collapse.
10 out of 12.
Yeah.
The majority rule.
Yeah. They report that the people dwelling in the land are fierce, that the cities are fortified and very large. But the linchpin of their terrifying report is their claim to have seen the descendants of Anak there. the Anakim.
Which, modern readers might just skip over as, oh, they saw some tall people. But the cultural context here is so much darker, isn't it? The Anakim were associated with the Nephilim.
Yes, we have to look at the ancient Near Eastern mythology surrounding these terms. To the ancient Israelites, the Nephilim weren't just physically intimidating warriors.
What were they seen as?
Well, in the broader cultural consciousness of the ancient world, these figures were viewed as semi-divine, chaotic beings, sort of remnants of a chaotic pre-flood era.
Wow. So it wasn't just they're big, it was they're monsters.
Exactly. When the 10 spies invoke the name of the Nephilim, they aren't just giving a military assessment, they are invoking cosmic terror.
They're telling a population of former brickmakers that they have to go fight mythological demons.
Right. You can see why panic set in.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. I look at this absolute psychological collapse, and I see the exact mechanics of a modern anxiety spiral.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about how human nature operates. This older generation of Israelites had literally watched the greatest superpower on earth, Egypt, be brought to its knees by miraculous plagues.
They had a front row seat to it.
They walked through the parted waters of the Red Sea. They had a tangible, undeniable track record of survival and supernatural provision. Yet, 10 panicked voices completely erase all of that historical data.
We see the exact mechanics of that echo chamber right there in the text. It starts with the spies spreading a bad report, and it metastasizes overnight.
It just spreads like wildfire.
It does. The entire congregation lifts up their voices and cries. They retreat to their tents, and the fear morphs into this dark, paranoid theology.
They start accusing God, right?
Yeah, they begin to grumble and accuse God of actively hating them. They construct this bizarre narrative that God only brought them out of Egypt to have them slaughtered by the Amorites.
Which is such a profound betrayal of their own lived experience. I mean, why is human nature so quick to forget a tangible miracle, but so easily paralyzed by the rumor of a giant?
Because fear targets our deepest survival instincts.
Right. The fear of what might happen completely overwrites the knowledge of what has already happened. The echo chamber validates our worst assumptions until we're convinced the universe is conspiring against us.
And in doing so, we sentence ourselves to our own wilderness.
Wow. That's powerful. And the tragedy of Kadesh Barnea serves as this ultimate historical warning about adopting a catastrophic worldview.
Because the consequence of their panic is a severe, definitive divine oath. God decrees that not a single warrior of that older, faithless generation will ever set foot in the Promised Land.
With the exception of the 2 spies who urged faith, right? Joshua and Caleb.
Right, just those 2. The rest are sentenced to wander in the wilderness until that entire adult generation passes away.
And there is a devastating, almost poetic irony in this judgment that our sources highlight.
Oh, regarding the children?
Yes. When the older generation was in the middle of their panic attack, their primary excuse for retreating was their kids. They cried out, "Our little ones will become a prey. They will be captured and killed."
They weaponized their own kids to justify their cowardice.
Exactly. And God turns that entirely upside down. He issues a decree stating that those exact children, the new generation who at that time, quote, have no knowledge between good and evil, would be the very individuals to inherit the land.
The parents use their children as a shield for their lack of faith.
And God made those kids the ultimate inheritors of the promise, while the parents were left to die in the desert. It's wild. But the vacillation of the human heart in this narrative is just stunning.
Because they changed their minds again almost immediately.
Yes. The moment Moses announces this devastating 40-year sentence, the older generation experiences this desperate whiplash. They suddenly wake up and say, "Oh, wait, we have sinned. We'll go up and fight right now."
It is a textbook example of confusing the panic of consequences with genuine faith.
Right. I'm sorry, I got caught, basically.
Exactly. Moses explicitly warns them not to go. He tells them, "Do not go up, for the Lord is not among you." He warns them they will be struck down.
But they don't listen.
No, they act presumptuously. They try to conquer the hill country entirely on their own strength, attempting to force a victory that they had rejected when God was actually backing them.
And the result is a total massacre. The Amorites living in that hill country come out against them, and the text uses a very vivid simile. It says they chase them like a swarm of bees all the way to a place called Horma in Seir.
A bee swarm is an incredibly apt metaphor for ancient warfare in that terrain.
I can't even imagine just thousands of angry warriors pouring out of the hills.
It implies a relentless, stinging, overwhelming pursuit from which there is no organized retreat, only chaotic flight. The older generation learns the hard way that presumption is just as fatal as cowardice.
You cannot weaponize God's promises after you have fundamentally rejected the terms of his covenant.
Exactly.
So this older generation is officially sentenced to wander until they die off. But the sources make a crucial point here. God did not abandon the nation.
No, he was playing a long restorative game.
Right. While the older generation was slowly passing away, God was actively preparing the new generation, the ones who were kids, during the Kadesh Barnea disaster.
And he begins his preparation by teaching them a massive counterintuitive lesson in geography and divine boundaries.
Let's get into the geography of sovereignty. As the 40 years draw to a close and this new generation begins their migration northward toward Canaan, God issues very strict, non-negotiable military boundaries.
Right. They are commanded to pass near the territories of 3 specific nations: Edom, Moab, and Ammon.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. They're explicitly forbidden from initiating any hostility against them or taking any of their land.
And God gets incredibly specific. He tells Moses he will not give Israel so much as a foot breadth of Edomite territory. Why? Because Edom is populated by the descendants of Esau, the brother of Israel's patriarch, Jacob.
And Moab and Ammon are populated by the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew.
So there's family history there. But God explicitly states that he himself gave those specific lands to those specific people as their possession.
Israel is ordered to literally purchase the food they eat and the water they drink while passing through Edom.
What's fascinating here is what this means for Israel's theology. If we connect this to the bigger picture, God is demonstrating his absolute overarching sovereignty over non-covenant nations, right?
Absolutely. He's doing it to confirm his specific promise to Israel. Consider the internal logic the new generation is being taught here.
Okay, lay it out for me.
If God has the ultimate authority to act as the cosmic landlord, assigning land to Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and if he has the power to enforce those borders so strictly that not even his own chosen people can violate them,
then Israel can have absolute rock-solid confidence that he possesses the power to give Canaan to them.
Exactly. He is proving his jurisdiction.
He's demonstrating that he is not merely a localized tribal deity whose power stops at the edge of the Israelite camp. He's sovereign over the entire map.
He enforced Esau's lease, and he is fully capable of enforcing Israel's lease.
I love that. And the sources also draw our attention to this really fascinating editorial note inserted into the text of Deuteronomy, which serves as historical proof for this new generation.
Oh, about the giant.
Yes. The text mentions that the Moabites and Ammonites, in order to settle their respective lands, actually had to wage war against and drive out their own populations of giants.
Which is an incredible detail.
The Moabites defeated a giant race known as the Imim, a name literally meaning the dreaded ones.
The descendants of Esau in Edom drove out the Horeb.
And the Ammonites drove out a giant people called the Zamzumites.
The Zamzumites. The names alone sound like ancient nightmare fuel.
They really do, but think about the psychological impact of this historical data on the young Israelite army. It must have been incredibly profound.
It was a calculated dismantling of their inherited trauma. The text is connecting the dots for them.
How so?
It's saying, if these non-covenant nations, Edom, Moab, Ammon, could drive out terrifying, towering giants simply because God sovereignly allowed them to possess that land in the past, then surely Israel, who actually holds the explicit, sworn covenant promises of God, can drive out the Anakim in Canaan.
Oh, wow. It completely deflates the paralyzing myth of the invincible giant that destroyed their parents' faith.
Right. It takes away the excuse.
So what does this all mean for us today? Because obviously you and I aren't marching past the borders of ancient Edom.
Not recently, anyway.
Right. But we do constantly look at other people's territory. You know, their career success, their relationships, their social standing, their roles.
And human nature gives us this innate drive to conquer, to covet, to take what isn't ours.
Exactly. But this deep dive into divine boundaries teaches something vital about our own moral development.
The discipline of restraint is the fundamental prerequisite to righteous stewardship. If Israel had attacked Edom, they wouldn't have been demonstrating faith. They would have been demonstrating greedy aggression.
Right. Staying in our designated lane is essential. True victory isn't about conquering everything in your field of vision. It requires respecting the limits set around us.
The new generation of Israel had to prove they could obey a no from God before they could be trusted with a yes.
They had to respect the property rights of Esau and Lot before they could receive their own inheritance. Recognizing what is not yours is the absolute first step to properly managing what is yours.
It was an ethical test designed to ensure they wouldn't become an imperialistic menace.
And it's a test they pass. Which leads us to the moment of truth. After 40 years of waiting, 40 years of consuming manna and wandering the sands, the grace period of their geographical restriction ends.
The boundaries shift. Israel finally engages in battle on the eastern side of the Jordan.
First blood. These are the ancient victories that directly foreshadow the ultimate conquest of Canaan. God commands them to pass over the Arnon Gorge.
This is the crucial boundary line. Once they crossed the Arnon, they were entering the territory of two powerful Amorite kings who controlled the Transjordan.
Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan.
Let's examine the encounter with Sihon first, because it involves a very specific diplomatic sequence. Moses doesn't simply cross the border with swords drawn.
He tries diplomacy first.
Exactly. From the wilderness of Kedemoth, he sends messengers to Sihon with words of peace. He requests a highway passage.
He promises that the Israelites will not turn aside into the fields or vineyards. They'll stay entirely on the main road, and that they will pay silver for all food and water.
But Sihon doesn't just politely decline the offer. The text says his spirit was hardened and his heart made obstinate by God.
Which implies a profound, almost irrational level of hostility to a basic diplomatic request.
Right. He rallies his entire army and marches out against Israel at a place called Jahaz. And Israel completely decimates his forces, capturing all his cities.
This sequence raises a really significant theological question, though, regarding the intersection of divine sovereignty and human agency.
It's a tough one.
Right. If God already intended to give Sihon's land to Israel, why did Moses send messengers with words of peace in the first place?
Well, it almost looks like a trap, or at least highly disingenuous diplomacy to modernize.
See, exactly. Why go through the motions?
It is actually a crucial legal and moral mechanism of the ancient Near East. Offering terms of peace established a clear historical paper trail of peaceful intent.
Ah, so putting it on the record.
Right. Sihon was presented with a genuine choice. However, his pre-existing arrogance and hostility, which God confirmed or hardened, led him to choose war.
So the theological principle demonstrated here is that God's justice, even his severe historical judgments, is preceded by an opportunity for peace.
Exactly. Sihon's unprovoked military aggression against a peaceful migration proved he was a hostile threat that required removal. Israel's retaliation was, therefore, unequivocally justified under ancient rules of engagement.
Sihon forced their hand, he initiated the violence, and he suffered the ultimate consequence. But immediately after Sihon, Israel faces a much more terrifying prospect.
The final boss.
The final boss of the Transjordan, Og, the king of Bashan. And our sources provide a staggering amount of detail regarding the sheer impossibility of this specific conflict.
Og of Bashan was not just a king, he was a living legend. The texts describe him as one of the last remaining members of the Rephaim Malkam, the ancient giants.
But the real terror wasn't just Og's physical size, it was his geography. His kingdom was centered in a region called Argob.
The geological reality of Argob is crucial here. It was a massive, oval-shaped island of solid basalt rock.
Just a huge slab of volcanic rock.
Right, roughly 60 miles long by 20 miles wide, rising abruptly 30 feet out of the surrounding fertile plains of Bashan. It was a rugged, stony, naturally fortified stronghold created by ancient volcanic activity.
And perched on this impenetrable rocky fortress, Og had 60 cities. 60. And the text takes great pains to emphasize that these cities were fortified with high walls, gates, and iron bars.
Think about the mechanics of this from a military standpoint.
Yeah, you have a nomadic people, the Israelites, who have lived in tents for 40 years. They have no siege engines, they have no battering rams, they have absolutely no experience in complex siege warfare.
If Og had simply locked the gates and stayed inside his basalt fortresses, it would have been a logistical nightmare, if not an outright impossibility, for Israel to dislodge him.
Yet, inexplicably from a tactical perspective, Og does not stay behind his walls.
No, God draws him out. Og marches his army into the open field at a place called Edrei, and Israel defeats him in open combat.
And following that victory, Israel proceeds to systematically capture every single one of those 60 walled cities in Argob.
The victory chant recorded in the text is incredibly telling. It says, "Not one city was too strong for us."
But the sources point out that a more literal translation from the Hebrew is actually "not one city was too high for us."
The word high is the linchpin of the entire narrative arc here. It is a direct linguistic callback to the catastrophic failure of their parents 40 years prior at Kadesh Barnea.
Right. Remember the specific phrase the 10 spies used? They terrified the older generation by claiming the Canaanite cities were walled up to heaven.
Yes. By orchestrating the conquest of Og's impossibly high-walled basalt cities, God was directly curing the inherited trauma of the new generation.
He was providing physical, undeniably historical proof that no wall, no matter how high or how heavily fortified, was beyond his capacity to breach.
So these victories on the eastern side of the Jordan, which eventually become the designated inheritance for the Israelite tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, are so much more than mere territorial expansion.
They are a profound psychological restructuring.
They served as a tangible, bloody foreshadowing. It was God demonstrating in real time, look at the Amorite Sihon, look at the giant Og, look at their 60 high-walled cities on the rocks of Bashan. What I just did to them, I'm about to do to the Canaanites across the river. Do you trust me now?
Wow. The 40 years of wilderness wandering were meticulously designed to humble them and strip away their slave mentality.
And the consecutive victories over Sihon and Og were designed to embolden them, permanently grounding their courage not in their own non-existent siege capabilities, but in the proven historical faithfulness of their God.
So we are tracking this incredible upward trajectory of the new generation. But this brings up what modern readers often find to be the most jarring, uncomfortable part of the text.
The Holy War.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We cannot thoroughly examine the book of Deuteronomy without exploring the moral imperative, the why, behind the Holy War. Because the explicit command given to Israel regarding the Canaanite nations waiting across the Jordan River is staggering to modern sensibilities.
It is undeniably the most difficult theological hurdle in the source material.
It really is. Now, just to be clear to you listening, our goal here is to impartially report what the texts and our sources say, to understand their internal logic, not to endorse these ancient practices.
Exactly. We're looking at how the ancient authors framed it. And the text records God explicitly commanding Israel to systematically destroy the Canaanite nations, men, women, and children.
They are ordered to utterly destroy them, to show no mercy, and to make no treaties with them.
If we look purely at how the ancient authors justified this in their own historical context, they viewed this not as a campaign of imperialistic bloodlust, but as a highly specific, one-time execution of divine justice.
Right. The narrative actually forces the reader to look hundreds of years backward. It references the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 16.
Where God is speaking to Abraham.
Yes. In that text, God tells the patriarch Abraham that his descendants will not inherit the land of Canaan for 4 generations, specifically because, quote, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete.
That verse is the foundational key to understanding the text's internal logic. It means that God granted the Canaanite culture 400 years of patience.
4 centuries of grace to repent and alter their societal trajectory before the judgment finally fell.
This was not a sudden arbitrary whim of a violent deity. According to the text, it was the culmination of a centuries-long observation of a culture descending into absolute darkness.
And the sources provide extensive archaeological and historical context regarding the specific nature of that Canaanite iniquity.
We aren't just talking about a society that worshiped different gods in some benign way.
Far from it. We are talking about a culture characterized by institutionalized, severe moral depravity.
The most prominent and horrific feature being the worship of the god Molech, which required the literal sacrifice of living children.
The mechanics of Molech worship, as understood through ancient texts and archaeology, are deeply disturbing. It involved a large bronze statue of the deity, heated from the inside by a roaring fire until it was glowing red hot.
That's horrifying.
Infants were placed onto the burning arms of the statue, while loud drums were beaten to drown out the screams so the parents would not hear. And this was a state-sanctioned religious institution.
It wasn't just some fringe cult, it was their society.
Right. Alongside this, the culture engaged in widespread temple prostitution and bestiality as forms of sympathetic magic to ensure agricultural fertility. The historical notes we are reading describe the Canaanite culture as a moral cancer. The ancient argument presented in Deuteronomy is that if this culture was left unchecked, if it was allowed to coexist alongside the Israelites, it would fatally infect them.
And tragically, history shows they eventually did adopt some of these practices.
All right, but the fear was it would bring about the destruction of God's chosen people, thereby thwarting the entire divine plan to bring eventual redemption to the rest of the world. So the Holy War is framed by the text as this radical, desperate, surgical excision required to save the larger body of humanity.
Furthermore, the text makes a concerted effort to demonstrate that this judgment was based strictly on morality, not on racial or ethnic superiority.
Which is a key distinction. God spared individuals within that Canaanite culture who recognized the moral authority of Israel's God and turned away from their culture's depravity.
Rahab, the prostitute in Jericho, and the entire population of Gibeon are prime examples.
Right. They acknowledged the God of Israel and were subsequently shown mercy and fully integrated into the Israelite community.
The text repeatedly emphasizes that this war was a unique, unrepeatable, historical event. Israel was acting strictly as the instrument of God's judgment at one specific moment in time. It was absolutely not establishing a precedent for future geopolitical conquests.
And to make sure the Israelites understand this, Moses issues a massive, blistering warning, which the sources categorize as the prosperity trap.
You find this heavily detailed in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and chapter 9.
Moses tells the victorious Israelite army point blank, "Do not think for a second in your heart that you are going in to possess this land because you are such good, righteous people."
The rhetoric in Deuteronomy 9 is brutal in its honesty. God tells Israel, understand that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord is giving you this land to possess, for you are stiff-necked people.
He really doesn't hold back.
Not at all. Moses then proceeds to publicly recount a humiliating laundry list of their past rebellions. He reminds them of the golden calf incident at Mount Sinai, the rebellion at Kadesh Barnea, the complaining at Massa.
He is reminding them that, based on their own track record, they actually deserved the exact same divine judgment the Canaanites were currently receiving.
The land was an unmerited gift of grace. It was not a reward for moral perfection.
And this is where the deeper purpose of the 40-year wilderness wandering comes into incredibly sharp focus. God humbled them out there. He allowed them to experience genuine hunger, and then he fed them miraculously with manna from heaven.
Why? To teach them a specific mechanism of survival.
Moses says he did it to teach them that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord.
Which means that their very survival, their continued existence as a nation, depended entirely on their ethical obedience to God's spoken decrees.
Not on their own agricultural expertise or economic output or military might.
The entire 40-year system of manna was designed to aggressively strip away human self-dependence.
Because God knew what would happen once they crossed the Jordan. Once they entered the land and became prosperous, once they started eating from vineyards they didn't plant, living in stone houses they didn't build, and drinking from deep wells they didn't dig.
The overwhelming temptation of human nature would be to say, my power and the strength of my own hands have produced this wealth for me.
The prosperity trap. To combat this, God institutes a rigorous ethical requirement for their occupation of the land.
To avoid becoming the very moral cancer they are displacing, the Israelites are legally bound by the covenant to establish absolute impartial justice.
They are commanded to care for the fatherless, the widow, and the alien, the most vulnerable, marginalized members of ancient society.
They're ordered to destroy all objects of pagan worship. Their continued tenure in the land is explicitly conditional upon their ethical stewardship.
What's deeply moving here is how the text binds theology and ethics inextricably together. In the framework of Deuteronomy, you cannot claim to love God while simultaneously ignoring the plight of your neighbor.
If they failed to execute justice for the widow and the orphan, they were fundamentally breaking the covenant.
And the text issues a chilling warning. If they act like the Canaanites, the land will literally vomit them out, just as it vomited out the nations before them.
It demands a complete shift in perspective regarding wealth and success. And this principle is profoundly applicable today.
Absolutely. We live in a modern culture that idolizes the concept of the self-made individual. When we achieve a milestone, we secure the promotion, we launch the successful business, we buy the house, our default setting is self-congratulations.
We attribute our prosperity solely to our own late nights, our own intellect, our own righteousness.
But the profound lesson of the wilderness strips that arrogance away. It reminds us that every single resource we possess, the cognitive capacity to perform our jobs, the geographic and historical circumstances of our birth, the very oxygen in our lungs, it is all a granted gift.
It is grace. And if you reframe your life through that lens, your primary duty in life shifts.
It stops being about the endless accumulation of more territory or more wealth, and it becomes about the ethical stewardship of the power you've been given. Are you utilizing your success to care for the vulnerable in your sphere of influence?
Because if you aren't, the ancient text suggests you are failing the most basic test of prosperity.
Man, that hits hard. And this weighty realization brings us to the final, incredibly poignant narrative arc of our deep dive, the transition of power.
The passing of the baton from Moses to Joshua on the plains of Moab.
This sequence is a masterclass in leadership, but it is also deeply tragic. Moses is 120 years old, and the text goes out of its way to note his physical condition. It says that despite his extreme age, his eye was not dim nor his natural force abated.
He is still sharp. He is still a vital, commanding presence.
But he is strictly forbidden by God from crossing the Jordan River. He has spent 40 grueling years putting up with a stubborn, rebellious nation, leading them through the dirt and the heat, and he is denied the payoff.
We have to explore the why behind this exclusion. It traces back to an event at the waters of Meribah.
Right. What happened there?
Years prior, the people were aggressively complaining about a lack of water. God instructed Moses to take his staff, gather the assembly, and simply speak to a specific rock, promising it would yield water.
Sounds simple enough. God intended to demonstrate unmerited grace.
But Moses, exhausted and boiling over with frustration at the people's constant rebellion, disobeys the specific mechanism of the command. He strikes the rock twice with his staff, shouting, "Hear now, you rebels! Must we bring you water out of this rock?"
Must we bring you water? He inserted himself into the miracle. He took the credit.
It was worse than just taking credit. He fundamentally misrepresented the character of God to the nation.
How so? By being angry.
By striking the rock in violent anger, he made God appear as a hostile, reluctant deity who had to be physically coerced into providing for his people, rather than a gracious father offering water freely.
Ah, I see.
Because Moses was the supreme human representative of God to Israel, this public distortion of God's character was a massive failure. The principle is, to whom much is given, much is required.
God disciplined his top leader severely. Moses pleaded repeatedly to be allowed into the land, but God finally told him, "Speak no more to me of this matter."
But look at the breathtaking integrity of how Moses responds. He doesn't throw a tantrum. He doesn't incite a rebellion against God.
He doesn't try to tear down the institution he spent his life building just because he can't enjoy the final victory.
Right. He publicly accepts this discipline, demonstrated to the entire watching nation that absolutely no one, not even the ultimate prophet who spoke to God face to face, is above the rule of law.
Instead of wallowing in bitterness, Moses focuses entirely on the survival of the next generation. The entire book of Deuteronomy is the result of this focus. Deuteronomy literally translates to second law, or repeated law.
Moses is facilitating a massive final covenant renewal ceremony. He takes the law, the Torah, which is better understood as instruction rather than a rigid penal code, and he systematically preaches it to the new generation.
And then she writes it down. He establishes a law that this Torah must be read aloud to the entire nation every 7 years during the Feast of Booths.
The structural genius of that septennial reading is incredible. He is ensuring that every new generation, including the children and the foreigners living among them, would be repeatedly saturated in their national constitution.
It was a built-in mechanism to prevent the spiritual amnesia that had so thoroughly destroyed their parents at Kadesh Barnea.
And then God introduces an even more fascinating psychological tool. God reveals to Moses that eventually, despite all the sermons in the written scrolls, the people will fail.
Wait, God just tells him straight up?
Yep, they will inevitably break the covenant and turn to other gods. So God instructs Moses to compose a song. We know it as the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32.
Why a song? Why not another legal tablet?
Because God understands the psychology of human memory. A song is easily memorized. It bypasses the analytical brain and lodges itself deep in the memory centers.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
We all remember song lyrics from when we were kids.
Right. It is a majestic, sweeping, prophetic poem that recounts God's perfect historical faithfulness, explicitly predicts Israel's future unfaithfulness, and ultimately prophesies God's vengeance on his enemies and the final gracious restoration of his people.
And God tells Moses that long after the people have forgotten the written laws, the lyrics of this song will spontaneously rise up in their minds. It will serve as an undeniable internal witness against them when they fall into idolatry.
It is quite literally a divine earworm of accountability, a song that haunts them with the truth.
And with the song written and the law delivered, we reach the climax of Moses' life, which is dripping with profound theological symbolism. God commands Moses to climb Mount Nebo to the highest peak of Pisgah.
From that elevated vantage point, God grants him a miraculous sweeping vision of the entirety of the Promised Land.
He sees Gilead, Dan, Naphtali, Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And there, overlooking the inheritance he labored his entire life for but could not enter, Moses dies.
And the text says God himself buried him in an unknown valley in Moab, so no one could ever turn his grave into a shrine.
The transition from Moses to Joshua here is the theological crux of the entire Hebrew Bible. Moses is the physical embodiment of the law, and the law is vital.
It can guide you, it can instruct you, it can reveal God's standard, and it can bring you right to the very threshold of the promise.
But the law, by its very nature, cannot bring you into ultimate rest because humanity is incapable of perfectly keeping it. It requires a new era of grace and a new leader to actually bring the people into the inheritance.
Joshua, whose name in Hebrew is Yeshua, the exact same linguistic root as the name Jesus, is the one commissioned to lead them across the water. Moses passing the baton to Joshua represents the monumental theological shift from the preparation of the law to the realization of the promise.
I think about Moses standing on that mountain, like the visionary founder of a startup company. He builds it from the garage phase. He suffers through the lean years, the infighting, the near bankruptcies. He builds it into a massive enterprise.
But at a certain point, the company needs to scale in a way that requires an entirely different operational skill set.
Yes, but Moses isn't just stepping down because of age. He's stepping down because he made a fatal public relations error that misrepresented the company's sole investor. It hurts, but he accepts it.
True leadership is recognizing that your ultimate legacy isn't the territory you personally conquer.
Right. Your legacy is the generation you prepare to succeed in a territory where you yourself cannot go.
Moses' greatness was certainly demonstrated in bringing Israel out of Egypt. But his supreme greatness was manifested in his humility, in spending his final days preparing Joshua to take them into Canaan.
So we have tracked this massive, sweeping, historical epic. We watched a fearful, faithless older generation doom themselves at Kadesh Barnea because they chose the echo chamber of their anxieties over the reality of their miracles.
We saw God meticulously train the new generation through the geography of sovereignty, proving that respecting divine boundaries is the absolute prerequisite to moral development.
We witnessed the staggering first blood victories over the giant Sihon and the basalt fortress of Og, proving that no wall is too high for God's power.
We unpacked the heavy moral imperative behind the conquest, learning that prosperity demands rigorous ethical stewardship.
And finally, we stood on Mount Nebo and watched the heartbreaking, beautiful transfer of leadership from Moses to Joshua.
It is a profound narrative of human failure, continually met by divine persistence. But before we conclude, we must look at one final, deeply provocative concept from the sources that ties this entire historical epic into our current reality.
Oh, where do the sources point us for this?
They point us to Deuteronomy chapters 28 through 30. When you analyze these chapters, you realize Moses wasn't simply giving the Israelites a set of contemporary laws. He was actually pre-writing their entire future history.
Pre-writing their history, like a prophecy.
Yes. In astonishingly precise, terrifying detail, these chapters predict not just their initial prosperity in Canaan, but their eventual catastrophic rebellion.
Oh, wow.
The text explicitly predicts their future dispersions. It describes the horrors of the later Babylonian and Roman sieges centuries before they occurred, detailing enemies coming from afar whose language they would not understand, and predicting the exact harrowing curses they would suffer for breaking the covenant.
So it's an ancient document accurately predicting the diaspora of its own people.
Exactly. However, and this is the pivotal term, the prophecy does not end in a curse. Moses predicts that after they have been scattered to the farthest ends of the earth, a time will come when they will remember the covenant.
And God promises that he will regather them from all the nations.
But he goes one crucial step further. He promises that upon their return, he himself will circumcise their hearts.
Circumcise their hearts, meaning a fundamental internal transformation rather than just demanding compliance to an external law.
The book of Deuteronomy openly acknowledges its own limitation. It recognizes that external laws, no matter how holy or perfect, cannot produce internal righteousness because the human heart is fundamentally flawed and prone to wandering.
So God makes a unilateral promise. In the future, he will do for humanity what humanity cannot do for itself. He will change their very nature from the inside out so that they can truly love him and live.
The historical consequences of their bad choices were entirely predictable. Yet the promise of their ultimate restoration was unconditionally guaranteed by a merciful God.
Think deeply about what that means for your own life, sitting right there, listening to this. We are all prone to wandering. We all fail stress tests.
Everyone does.
We all stand on the precipice of major life changes and allow the heavy, murky weight of our past mistakes to paralyze us. What does it mean for you to know that while your poor choices will absolutely have predictable, painful consequences, the ultimate promise of your restoration, the healing and transformation of your own heart, is unconditionally guaranteed by a merciful Creator?
It fundamentally changes how you view your own wilderness, doesn't it?
It really does.
It means the wilderness is never meant to be a permanent graveyard. It is a classroom. It is the place where self-reliance is dismantled so that genuine faith can be constructed.
I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring those boundaries in your own life. Keep interrogating your own assumptions and fears. And the next time you find yourself standing at the threshold of a massive change, feeling the ghosts of your past dragging you backward, remember the view from Mount Nebo. The past is done. The promised land is ahead. Be strong, be courageous, and take the step.
Join us every week for a deep dive into a book of the Bible from the story behind Scripture.
If you'd like to read more about the stories behind Scripture, try Written in Fire, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of the destruction of Solomon's temple, told through the pages of the Bible and the voices of the prophets. The fire that destroyed the city and the temple did not end in ashes, but in a Messiah. Pick up Written in Fire on Amazon today.